Good morning, Dr. Maldrito Balles. I am Angelica Abigan and my co-reporter Raquel Mindanyo. We will report to you Module 3 Reading as a Process. Before we start, let us first know the objectives. After studying this module, you should be able to: Number 1, summarize how the central nervous system transmits and processes messages through the brain mechanism of language. 2. Discuss the basic principles of human information processing. 3. Enumerate and exemplify the three major sources of redundancy in print. 4. Compare and contrast the three alternative views of the reading process and implications from the process view for reading instructions. Before we proceed, let us first define what is neuro. Neuro is the nerve that would be the brainwork that is connected to the physiological act of hearing, seeing, and speaking of words. Meaning to say, you have never been asked this question, but using our common sense and my background in reading, I would say that reading involves seeing letters, words, and paragraphs, hearing sounds of letters, words, and syllables, understanding or comprehending what one reads. Which involves a number of thinking of skills. Physiological process. Reading is a neural activity. Meaning to say, the neural activity pattern compromising a memory involves a network of millions of neurons extending over a wide area. Activity patterns for different memories overlap depending on which features they share. Next is reading is a way of how we speak text which involves our brain that processes the message of the body. Meaning to say, it changes in the brain result from each reading that you do. Whether you will continue to read or turn to another activity depends on the connection that are made in the brain while you read. Let us now move on to the visual factor. The visual factor is the child vision as it relates to reading and the task of developing skills in visual discrimination. It is also your eye movement that might be related to the internal representations. Let's cite some example. Ask one of your classmates to participate in class and answer this question. Observe his eye movement. Who were the five people you saw this morning? His eyes up and left non-dominant hemisphere visualization. Example given are remembered imagery. The person he last saw this morning is remembered. However, also the structure of our eyes. It is the parts of our eyes as you noticed in the illustration. In reading, it has only two movements: fast reading and slow reading. The first one is fast reading, fast eye movement. It is involuntary, jump eye movement, scanning, skimming, and browsing. While the next is the slow reading or the slow eye movement. Smooth eye movement, a rapid irregular movement of the eye as it changes focus moving from one point to another. It is also essential for becoming a successful reader. Next is ear. Our ears is the anatomical organ that detects sound. It is not only act as a receiver for sound, but also plays a major role in the sense of balance and body position. The hearing process begins when sound waves enter the auditory canal and strike the eardrum, a membrane about 1/2 inch across, which is capable of handling over 73,000 vibrations per second. So when sound hits the eardrum, it causes movements of the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Next is the brain. Our brain is a complex organ that controls our thought, memory, emotion, touch, motor skills, vision, breathing, temperature, hunger, and every process that regulates our body. So, our brain is a very complex organ. Unlike any other part of your body, everything you do, feel, think, involves many areas of them. Do you know that when you blink, many parts of our brain jumps into action? So this is the illustration of our brain and its part are frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe, brainstem, and cerebellum. So the neurons is the messenger of our brain. Some of these brain cells are special nerve cells which make it possible for the brain and other parts of the body to send signals back and forth. You might call neurons the messenger of our brain. Next is synapses. The synapses is the network communicators that send and receive electrochemical signals in more thousands of seconds at connection. The glial cells and cerebral spinal fluid are helping the neurons are the glial cells and the cerebral spinal fluid. The glial cells surround each neuron and act like a net to hold its delicate parts in its place. The neutral transmission process. Cell body. Cell body are the basic building blocks of all living things. They provide structure for the body, take in nutrients from food, convert those nutrients into energy, and carry out a specialized function. The axon is the cable, several times thinner than a human hair. It is called axon, and it is where electrical impulses from the neuron travel away to be received by other neurons. Next is the dendrite. The dendrite is a tree branch that are designed to receive communications from other cells. They resemble a tree-like structure, forming projections that becoming stimulated by other neurons and conducted the electrochemical charges to the cell body. So this is the illustration of our neurons. So this is the illustration of neurons. So we have neuron number 1 and neuron number 2. The incoming message will go to soma and become outgoing message to axon, then to synapses. From synapses, it will be a message passed on to another neuron. It will become neuron number 2. Calvin and Ogernan, 1994. Neurological studies have shown that the axon actually comes to a dead end just outside another cell. There is really a gap, rather like the no man's land between the two independently maintained border fence of neighboring countries such as Israel and Syria. This gap is called synapse, what might be called the border crossing point where the output of one neuron's axon becomes the input to another neuron's dendrites or cell body. Electricity carries the message through the neuron except at the synapse itself. Though only a tenth of a volt from bottom to top, a neural impulse is the biggest voltage seen in your brain. What crosses at the synapse, however, is chemical information. For example, imagine opening a bottle of perfume at one border fence and letting the molecules waft across the no man's land, the synapse, to the other border fence where they are snipped by the dendrites on the other side, according to Calvin and Ojiman 1994. Each of your neurons may have as many as 50,000 incoming and outgoing messages to handle every minute. On the average, scientists estimate neurons' messages travels about 100 miles per hour. Next is the types of neurons. There are three types of neurons according to their function in the relaying of neutral messages: receptor neurons, connector neurons, and effector neurons, from Rubik and Wilson 1976. So the first one is the receptor neurons, are found in your eyes, ears, skin, joints, and various organs. These neurons have dendrites that are very sensitive to sensory stimulation. Example, those found in your eyes are extra sensitive to light waves, while those found in your ears are extra sensitive to sound waves. Receptor neurons also pick up changes in your body's position, as well as changes in the tension of your muscles. Number two is the connector neurons. As you might have guessed by their name, form the linkages between most of the neurons in the central nervous system. They make up more than 90 billion of the 10 billion neurons in your body. So they make up most of the brain, the spinal column, and the major sensory nerves, such as the optic and auditory nerves. They make up most of the reticular formation, the limbic system, and the cerebral cortex, which analyze and stores language. Number three is the effector or output. The neurons have axons that terminate in your muscles and glands, where they excite reactions. Effectors are parts of the body, such as muscles and glands, that produce a response to a detected stimulus. For example, a muscle contracting to move an arm. Muscle is squeezing saliva from the salivary gland. So this is the example of neurons. The first one is the receptor neurons or sensory neurons. The second one is the connector neurons or relay neurons. The last one is the effector or motor neurons. The brain mechanism of language. The first one is the sensory input system. It includes the specialized sense organs and neurons which receive sensory stimuli and relay this to the brain through the spinal cord. Clearly, for a reading, the visual and auditory systems are very important to components of the sensory input system. Imagine the amount of information that the sensory system is receiving and sending every second. How does your brain cope with this staggering number of messages? Your brain simply selects what is important and ignores the rest. Next is the reticular formation. In biological terms, this is the thalamus found in the midbrain. The reticular formation operates like a very busy switchboard, deciding what to do with the incoming and outgoing messages. It can send incoming messages on up to the other parts of the brain, or it can cancel them. More specifically, arousal and attention takes place in the reticular formation. For example, For instance, if your friend calls you when you are reading a good book and you don't honestly know him her, it may be because the reticular formation didn't pass on the message of your friend's voice. Number three is the limbic system. It is interconnected with the reticular formation. In biological term, this is the hypothalamus, located just in front of the thalamus. This system controls your emotions, including pleasure and punishment mechanisms, and formally the limbic system is referred to as the motivation center of the brain. Number four is the analysis and storage. It is the message chosen by the reticular formation together with the emotions linked to it by the limbic system. Is then carried to appropriate parts of the brain. In biological terms, this takes place in different areas of the cerebral cortex. The cortex covers the whole surface of the cerebrum about as thick as popsicle stick. It is the most recently developed part of the brain. It allows you to do so many things that only humans can do. Within the two halves of the cerebrum, there are centers for each of the major learning senses sight, hearing, and touch. You do not use much of your senses of smell and taste for learning, so their centers are located deep within the brainstem area. The section of the cerebrum that is under the bumps on the back of your head takes care of visual information on or every sight that you can see. Another area towards the sides of your head take care of oral information or all songs that you hear. So these are the areas that make you aware of what you touch. These are located around the area where a white happen would sit on your head. The motor strip, which takes the muscle control, is just in front of your imaginary headband. A simple way of describing the cerebrum, especially the cortical areas that cover it, is to say that it controls a great deal of what makes you special and nearly all of what makes you different from others. So, all reading activities, the four brain mechanisms before a response, such as reading aloud, is made, but all the action occurs in milliseconds. This is the structure of our brain. Midbrain, hindbrain, forebrain. The midbrain is the topmost part of the brainstem, the connection central between the brain and the spinal cord. Your thalamus is an egg-shaped structure in the middle of your brain. It is known as a relay station of all incoming motor, movement, and sensory information, hearing, taste, sight, and touch, but not smell, from your body to your brain. The cerebellum, the part of the brain at the back of the skull, in vertebrates, its function is to coordinate and regulate muscular activity. The forebrain is the anterior part of the brain, including the cerebral hemisphere, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus, while the cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. The hypothalamus is the area of the brain that controls body temperature, hunger, and thirst. Next is the eyes movements in reading. Do you know this that when you read, your eyes do not make a continuous sweep across the page? Rather, they move in a quick, short movement enterprise with poses. Eye movements are characterized by fixation, interfixation movements, regulations, and return sweeps. Fixation. Fixation is the stop that your eyes make so that you can react to what you are reading. The length of this pose includes both seeing and thinking time. You must have time to see to impress the stimuli. The length in terms of words and frequency of fixation vary depending on the difficulty of reading materials, your facility in word recognition, your familiarity with the content and the format of the printed page. For example, you will tend to make more and longer fixation if you are reading difficult materials. According to the study by Boswell, found the average child in grade 1 made between 15.5 and 18.6 fixation per 3 1/2 inch line, while the average college students made only 5.9 fixation on a line having similar length. Another study reports that the average first grade makes about 224 fixation per 100 words, while the average college students make about 90. It is according to Dechant 1964. Is the interfixation movement are caused by the eyes which moves from one stopping to another. Your eyes move from left to right during interfixation movements. When you take in data, your eyes converge during an interfixation movement but diverge during the fixation that follows and takes time. You use about 92 to 94% reading time for the fixation while you use only 6 to 8% of reading time for interfixation movements. So, regression is a reverse movement from right to left. You make regressions when you return to a previously read letter, syllable, word, or phrase for refixation. So, when your eyes reach the end of one line of print, they make a return sweep to the beginning of the next line. This takes about 40 to 54 milliseconds. If you miss the next line entirely, or if you're in a point before or after the first word of the new line, you must locate the proper place. So, if you If you miss the next line entirely, or if your eyes land on a point before or after the first word of the new line, you must locate the proper place. This requires refixation. Next is the general principles of human information processing. What happens when one person communicates with one another, either orally or in writing? Let us now take a look at some general principles that underlie human information processing. Simply put, this involves the flow of the information from a sender to a receiver. In speech, the information input is sound. In reading, the information is input is print. We have oral communication and written communication. So when we say oral communication, a speaker sends information to a listener, while the written communication is the writer or the author sends information to a reader. The problem for the receiver is to interpret the input into sound patterns and the patterns into units of informations. So when the meanings of the separate units of informations are linked together, the result is a meaningful messages. Therefore, the aim of communication is to have a match between the message sent and the one received. However, there are instances when the messages intended by the sender is not understood by the receiver. So, when we say then the message has noise, so noise refers to anything that makes the build-up information within a message unclear or which conveys no information. This may come in the form of literal noise, as when static drowns out a radio sound and disrupt your interpretation of the radio program. More often, however, noise is within the message itself, such as when the information is ambiguous and the meaning tentative. This creates uncertainty in the communication flow. So there is uncertainty when you have more than one meaning to choose from in making sense out of message. For example, how will you interpret this sentence? Ship sails today. Note that the sentence is ambiguous in that has two possible meanings. First, a sea vessel is leaving today. Two, somebody is being told to send the sails today. The most important outcome of language is the reduction of uncertainty. How do you do this? You look for sources of redundancy in the message. Redundancy refers to those features of the messages that make the meaning clearer. Redundancy reduces uncertainty or eliminates noise. If the units of information that weave together to build a message are highly redundant, and you are aware of the most of the redundancies, then you will understand the message more clearly. Thus, a message like "ship sails today" becomes clear with the addition of the word "the" as in "the ship sails today" or "ship the sails today." The word "the" in the two sentences above is a source of redundancy. The other major aid comes from your prior knowledge of the meaning content of the information. The more you know about the subject of the message, the more likely will you able to understand it. In summary, information processing theory tries to explain the major principles that underlie how meaning is constructed during common communication between a sender and a receiver of information. The receiver must be actively involved in constructing meaningful messages from incoming information. So, what are the major sources of redundancy in print? We will take a look of this after we have reviewed the basic principles of human information processing. Next, major sources of redundancy in print. You use different sources of information as you read and seek to understanding written text. Three language queuing systems operate during reading: graphophonic, syntactic, and semantic system. These three types of informations are the major sources of redundancy in print. We will define them in a while, but first read the sentence below and see if you can answer the questions that follow. The blue seeker picked the Wonglong because the Wonglong has go jump his pralagan. Number 1, Hokor picked the Wonglong. Number 2, what was it that the Wonglong go jumped? Number 3, why did the blue seeker pick the Wonglong? Were you able to give these answers? See, the answer for number 2 is the Bluesis pralagan. And number 3, because the Wonglong go jump his pralagan. I'm sure you did guess the correct answer. Many others can readily answer the questions. Why were you able to do that even if you do not know the nouns and verbs? In this example, unknown words and make up about 40% of the passage. Let me point out the clues that helped you. For example, number 1, the pattern the blank ed or id, the blank help you to say the door of the action and the receiver of the action. The ed ending was a further clue that told you which was the verb. Number 3, the word because signaled the reason for the action. Number 4, the word his referred to the blue sea, so you conclude that the blue sea is masculine. In short, you use printing signals for word order, tense, cause and effect relationship, reference to make sense of the passage. These are features of the grammar syntax of English that you already know. Now, if I ask you what passage is all about, you will be loose to give an answer. What is a blue sea anyway? Or a Wonglong or a Plaragan? So you see, your knowledge of grammar is not enough to make you understand the passage fully. Obviously, you need other types of knowledge to do that. Let's proceed to graphophonic information. So when we say graphophonic information, it is the relationship between the sounds and the written forms of the language. Grapho equals letters, semicolon phone equals sound. It includes the spelling orthographic system, the sound phonological system of the oral language, and the complex relationship between the two. So the sound symbol correspondence in Filipino are very regular. That is, words are written the way they are spoken. One letter stands for one sound and one sound usually is represented by one letter. Read this list of words: abangan, busabos, gulay, isda, kaakit-akit, mga, nang, tinanggihan, sumasalpok. These are two words in the list that are not written exactly as they are spoken. Do you know what they are? If you circled mga and nang, you are right on target. These two words have irregular spelling. If these words were written as spoken, they should be spelled nat and mga, respectively. Let us pause for a moment. Think of the words in Filipino which are irregularly spelled, don't include proper nouns. If you found it difficult to think of Filipino words that are irregularly spelled, don't worry, I myself have the same problem. This is because read these words, notice that the letter A has a different sound value in each word. Army, bat, cake, fur, pearl, santan. Now, take note of the underlined letters as you read each word below. What sound do they represent? Enough, family, telephone, coffee. The letters F or PH and or F in the words above all stand for the sound. These examples notwithstanding, experts point out that English sound symbol correspondence are actually more regular than irregular. However, at the start, young readers have many things to learn about regular and irregular sound correspondences. Eventually, they will learn enough to enable them to pronounce unfamiliar words. They will also be able to predict familiar words while reading phrases and sentences without looking at all the letters in a word. Here are some of the simple to more complex aspects of graphophonic information that you acquire as you learn to read. Simple graphophonic knowledge. Letter features, letter to sound relationships, letter cluster to sound relationships, variant letters representing the same sounds, spelling patterns which controls vowel sounds, the use of the preceding knowledge to analyze words. More complex graphophonic knowledge. Variant vowel sounds represented by the same letter, word and sound variants in breaking words into syllables, regularities in words which control sound symbol regularity, the use of context as a link between word sound and word meaning. That would be all. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I am Raquel A. Mindanyo. I will discuss to you the continuation topic of Module 3, Reading as a Process of Miss Angelica Abigan. So I will discuss to you the syntactic information, semantic information, three alternative views of reading process, bottom-up model, top-down model, and interactive model. Gough's model, what happens in 1 second of reading. Goodman's model, reading as psycholinguistic guessing game. Rumelhart's model, reading as interactive process. Processing and the beginning reading, and implications. So let us first define what is syntactic information. When we hear the word syntactic, meaning the structure, like does it sounds right? Syntactic information is extracted from the parser output and used in the answer selection process. Meaning, it refers to the formation how sentences work. The meaning behind word order, which means the order or arrangement in a phrase, clause, or sentence. This refers to the interrelationship among words in a sentence that follow from the grammar of the spoken language. For example, word order, tense, number, gender, and reference. Tense, it refers to when the action in a sentence takes place, whether it happened in the past, is happening in the present, or will happen in the future. And number, which means the use of singular and plural. This syntactic use in a sentence help you to organize words into groups or to predict what word will come next. Syntactic cues involve word order, rules and patterns of language, which is grammar, and punctuation. For example, the position a word holds in a sentence will cue the reader as to whether the word is noun or a verb. Conversely, readers use their intuitive knowledge of grammar to predict words are like to appear next. So I have here some example of syntactic information. First example, note boy the wrote note boy. So are the groups of words sensible or nonsense? This example is distinguishing between acceptable or unacceptable word orders. Syntactic use helps reader make sense out of nonsense. Next example, the boy wrote the blank. So, based on our knowledge of English, we know that noun or a thing must go in the blank. Third example, before Brian did his homework, he watched television. Brian watched television and later did his homework. So, are the sentences equivalent in meaning? This example using syntactic cues to establish equivalent sentence meaning. Next example, blank boy fell blank stairs. Blank mother put blank bed. Blank called doctor. So can you fill in the missing words? This example is the predicting words that signal word order without any graphic knowledge of them. So those examples show the order of syntactic redundancy the readers first become aware of when they learn to proficient readers. Collectively, these examples illustrate how syntactic sources of redundancy helps readers process meaning. So next is semantic information. So what is semantic information? Semantic information refers to all the features in the languages that establish meaning for a writer or reader. To be used, such meaning must already exist in the reader's memory. In other words, knowledge of the meaning of words and phrases. A reader actively uses words' meanings must knowledge of the word to organize word groups into sentences, to connect consecutive sentences, and to interrelate the sentences of a complex text. He also uses such knowledge to construct meaning when gaps in the meaning occur. So, the concept of semantic information refers to information which is, in some sense, meaningful for a systems, rather than merely correlational semantics is a grammatical structure. Here are the example of semantic information. Mr. De Leon uses this iron club when he plays golf. Mr. De Leon belongs to a sports club. The first word club meaning the stick that's used in the sport of golf. And the second word club is an organization or association or team. This example is understanding multiple meaning. Second example, Mr. De Leon took the club to the tournament. This is the example of understanding lexical ambiguity, meaning a word belongs to or more word. Third example, Angelica saw me. This is the example of multiple referents. In the sentence Angelica saw me, the referent of the word Angelica is the particular person called Angelica who is being spoken of, while the referent of the word me is the person uttering the sentence. For example, Noah has the heart of a lion. This is the example of understanding metaphor. The comparison of two different things that does not use the words like or as. Fifth example, the boss was asked to stop drinking in the office. This is the example of understanding semantic ambiguity. The word stop has more than one meaning, and the significance of the sentence changes dramatically depending on which meaning is intended. So reader must be active rather than passive in processing meaning. One way a child becomes a proficient reader is by using as many sources of redundancy as possible. Three alternative views of the reading process. So we have bottom-up model, top-down model, and interactive model. The bottom-up model views reading as starting with some graphic input or print. This model shows that reading begins with synthesis of letters into words, words into sentences, and so on until a large enough a unit of language is perceived. Then, as bottom-up theories conclude, the reader understands what the author has written. So bottom-up processing takes place as it happens. For example, if you see an image of an individual letter on your screen, your eyes transmit the information to your brain, and your brain puts all of this information together. The top-down model views reading as beginning with the reader's cognitive structures. In this view, the reader can understand what is on the page only if the ideas are already present in the reader's mind. Reading begins with a reader's understanding and proceeds to the reconstruction of the author's message. Whole words and entire sentences are the input, not individual letters. Example of top-down is that the whole language approach where learners are taught to identify entire words rather than combinations of sounds. In a reading comprehension, learners use their knowledge of the genre to predict what will be in the text. The interactive, also called transactive model shows that reading draws from the top and bottom simultaneously. In general, the interactive and top-down models have more in common with each other than with the bottom-up. An interactive reading model is an attempt to combine the two models, the top-down and bottom-up. It selects the strong point of the both models and integrates them in learning to read. Reading is understood at once as both perceptual and cognitive process. Gough's model, what happens in 1 second of reading? Philip B. Gough in Singer and Ruddle, 1976, has proposed a model of reading that is quite remarkable because it tries to give a complete information processing account of the reading process. Goff's attempts to pin down as completely as possible the events that occur during the first second of reading. The reader in the model is assumed to be the normal 400 word per minute reader. Reading begins with an eye fixation. The reader's eye focuses on a point slightly indented from the beginning of the line, and they will remain in that fixation for some 250 milliseconds. Then they sweep 10 to 12 liter spaces to the right in a saccadic movement consuming 10 to 23 msec, and a new fixation will begin. With fixations averaging 250 msec and interfixation movements occurring 10 to 23 msec and barring regressions and return sweeps, the reader will be making 3 to 4 fixations in 1 second. But what happens within 1 second of this first fixation? Goff described it above. So the print input, suppose the eye, enters the visual system and is registered as an icon, as yet unidentified, consisting of bars, slits, edges, curves, angles, and bricks. The icon is scanned and operated on by a pattern recognition device, the scanner, which identifies the icon as a series of letters. The letters are read into a character register which holds them while a decoder converts the letter strings into their phonemic representations of sounds equivalents. The sounds are imputed into a librarian which matches them against the lexicon, somewhat like a dictionary, and converts them into words. Since there are only a few words, the meaning is not yet clear. They are placed in the primary memory, which is PM, where the words wait for incoming words from the subsequent fixations. When there are enough words in the primary memory, they are sent to the system called Merlin, which applies its knowledge of syntax and semantics to determine the deep structure, meaning of the phrase or sentence. The deep structure is roughly the basic underlying meaning of the sentence, based on the syntactic relations among its elements. The surface structure is the sentence's form, either spoken or written. These are the only language forms we can observe or describe. The surface structure is produced from the deep structure through certain formal operations called grammatical transformations. Assuming success, the editor applies phonological rules on the words in the PM, converting them into script for a vocalization. The reader begins to speak suppose. Meanwhile, the deep structure is forwarded to TPWSGTAU, or the place where sentences go when they are understood, where it becomes part of the knowledge stored in the reader's memory. Thus, within 1 second, this is what has taken place. On the outside, the reader has rotated his eye few millimeters and he has begun to move his mouth. But on the inside, there has been a rapid succession of complex events. Some 20 to 25 letters have been internalized as characters and converted into abstract phonemes. Barring regressions and return sweeps, this process will be repeated as long as reading continues. When all inputs of the text have found their final resting place in TPWSGWTAU, the text has been read and the reading is complete. Take note of the general form of Goff's model For GAF, model, model consists of a sequentially ordered set of transformations from low-level sensory information into ever higher-level encodings. Simply put, processing begins with the smallest units which are combined to form bigger and more meaningful units. From lines and curves to letters or letter strings, then to words, then to phrase and sentences. The information flow as described is totally bottom up. This means that no higher level is of processing can affect any lower level processing. In short, for GAFs, the reading process is strict letter by letter, word by word analysis of the input stream. No provision is given for interaction within the system. The processing at any level can affect only the immediately higher level. So on the other hand, the model developed by Goldman looks at processing and reading from a top-down perspective. Goodman's model, reading as a psycholinguistic guessing game. The foregoing description roughly exemplifies the position taken by Goodman about the reading process, contradicting Gough's linear, parts to whole, bottom-up model. According to Goodman, all readers use the following strategies: initiating and sampling strategies, predicting strategies, and confirming strategies. Initiating and sampling. Reading begins even before the reader makes a fixation. Processing starts as soon as the reader acknowledges his intention to read. He shows initiating behavior by reading the title of the text and looking at the upper left-hand corner of the page to sample the print. Most likely, he will ignore much of the title page and publication information because he knows this is not necessarily intended for him. Predicting from the information sampled, the title, the cover, the first paragraph, some illustrations, the reader makes predictions about what information the text may contain. To predict, the reader uses graphophonic, syntactic, and semantic systems. Confirming, guessing may result in inappropriate predictions. This is the risk that the reader takes. Nevertheless, inferencing and guessing are absolutely necessary for reading occur. If the prediction is appropriate to the meaning that has been built up in the reading, readers confirm their predictions and continue to read. However, if the reader's predictions are not confirmed by the subsequent text, readers may behave in different ways depending on the situation. A reader may regress, that is, go back to material previously read. At other times, the reader may stop, think about possibilities, reorganize, modify the meaning of the text that is being built, and then continue reading. You do this often when you are reading a mystery novel. If you have predicted that one character is the murderer and that character becomes the victim in a subsequent chapter, you do not usually repeat the text. Instead, you simply rethink the other possibilities and make another prediction as to who the real culprit might be. In other situations, a reader may decide additional information is needed before modification is possible and reads on, sampling the text for more information, hoping for clarification. Of course, the reader may at any time choose to stop reading. Maybe the materials is too boring, too simple, or too difficult. Maybe the reader's mind wanders. Maybe the reader thinks additional background is necessary before further reading is possible. Rumelhart's model, reading as an interactive process. Rumelhart 1976 proposes an interactive model of reading to explain how a mature reader interacts with print. The model attempts to explain and illustrate the interactive aspects of the reading process more fully than other models do. The model is created on the plan of a parallel processing, where more than one level of information can be acted on at any one time. That is, the information flow is not direct and linear. The information can be acted on by two or more types of processing, and the different types of processing can interact with one another. Rumelhart was not the first to explain reading as an interactive process, but he was the first to introduce the idea of parallel processing to reading models. According to Rumelhart, reading involves perceptual and cognitive process in obtaining meaning from print. The meaning produced in a reading depends in part on the meanings already stored in the reader's schemata or prior knowledge. The reader takes information from various sources, and these sources act together to produce meaning. Any one source can be primary at any one time, but utilizing information from one source often depends on utilizing information from the others. So there are six sources of information a reader can use. Each contains specialized knowledge about some aspect of the reading process. These sources of knowledge stored as schemata are semantic, syntactic, lexical, the letter cluster, the letter, and letter features. These are hierarchically arranged with the semantic level being the highest. A reader can process information from a page by features of the individual letters, a bottom-up processing task, or by information from the semantic source about some general meaning category of the word, a top-down processing task. For example, on seeing the words the express train, the reader might be input this information by examining and analyzing. The individual letters features, the line and curves that make up individual letter features such as SP and T. Cluster of those letters AX, ESS, TR, or AIN. The syntactic relationships, noun, phrase in the object position of a sentence. The semantic relationships, fast locomotive or train that travels fast. Second important part of the model is the message center or pattern synthesizer. This center acts as storage unit that examines, interrelates, and interprets the information received from any and all of the knowledge sources. Each source generates one more hypothesis about the incoming information. The message center keeps track of all the hypotheses as well as their origins. With this, the reader formulates the most probable interpretation of what is being read. In turn, the knowledge sources are used in turn to scan the message center for a hypothesis relevant to its sphere of knowledge. The reader evaluates this hypothesis in light of the information in the specialized domain. During reading, the reader, using knowledge source, confirms or disproves the hypothesis. If disproved, they may remove from the message center, or the reader's knowledge source may create a new hypothesis to alter or replace the old one. So this process continues until a decision is made about the meaning of the information from the page. At the end of the process, the most probable hypothesis is considered the correct one. Processing and the beginning reader. Both Goff's and Goodman's models, their models are the most often used to justify approaches used in beginning reading instruction. This is to justify approaches used in beginning reading instruction. This is especially so in the case of the long-standing debate or whether beginning reading instruction should focus on letter to sound correspondence, which is decoding, or whole words, which is meaning. Goff's bottom-up model is equated with the first and Goodman's with the latter. The whole word approach provides a more direct path from symbol to meaning and thus makes the task of learning to recognize words interesting to the beginner, maybe easier as well. Young children have been found to have greater difficulty in learning letter-sound relationship than in learning to read sight words. However, even if whole words are initially easier to learn, children who have been taught to read without due emphasis on the mechanics of decoding become disadvantaged in the long run. It is true that beginning readers find it easier to guess at the identify of an unfamiliar word than decode it, given the context of a story. But this works well only when he is processing simple beginnings text. Top-down processing changes from a help to a hindrance when it is used to avoid decoding altogether. The guessing component of Goodsman model should be looked at, I think, in terms of predicting strategies. For instance, to guess at what a word means or to predict what information might be found in a text. This guessing would be most fruitful when it is based on accurate word identification. To the extent that guesses are based on prior guesses, the reader is not really on reading in a useful way. There seems to be a strong argument for the initial emphasis on decoding. However, this does not necessarily mean neglecting the use of top-down processes. When decoding, skills are taught within the context of a whole selections, such as simple stories or poems that are interesting, and combined with the learning of a whole words, then even beginners can be interactive processors of text from the start. Thus, we avoid a situation where a beginning reader might fail to adopt either a bottom-up or top-down strategy on one hand or adapt one of these strategies to the extreme or on the other hand. The implications. Several implications can be drawn for reading instruction based on the process dimensions of reading. Decoding skills should be developed to a level of automaticity and fluency so that processing strategy can be applied more fully to the understanding of longer passages. Readers, even beginners, must be taught better strategies for processing sentences and passages. This means going beyond letter sound, correspondences, and word meanings and developing strategies of predicting, confirming, and active sampling. So first, of importance is the strategy for predicting. So this includes predicting the most probable word for an unfamiliar words which cannot be readily pronounced by using either or a combination of graphophonic, syntactic, and or semantic cues. Second is confirming strategies should also be taught. Children could be taught to ask themselves whether words whose pronunciation they are not certain about it, but which they have attempted, sound correct in the sentence and or make sense. For example, suppose a child reads the word horse as house in the sentence. The big brown horse galloped away, so the teacher would ask if the house makes sense in a sentence. Third is teaching active sampling. The reader becomes aware of available options when a problem occurs in processing. So, should he stop? Should he spend as much time as needed in trying to sound it out? Should he skip the word? So, the principle of active sampling suggests skipping the word if the child doesn't already have enough cues to make an initial prediction that preserves the meaning or syntax of the entire sentence. So the important thing is not to disrupt the bridge between recent information and incoming meaning. So the last is the young readers must be taught to go beyond word-by-word reading. They should be given frequent opportunities to read material where majority of the words are known. Teaching words in the context or phrases rather than in isolation will also help. So, read aloud sessions where the teacher models where the children listen and follow along help young readers learn the syntactic and intonation cues which signal how to group words during reading. So that's the end of our discussion. Thank you for listening.